Washington Spirit. It's like the news and the updates are on Washington Spirit. It almost feels like it will never leave us. We got to update our listeners on some more things that are going on the Spirit side of things. Recently, the NWSL board approved unanimously the Michele Kang's attempt to go ahead and vet and obtain voting control of the Washington Spirit via, vetting the other minority owners and obtaining a larger amount of shares in terms of, voting control. And this was a little bit chaotic. We did an episode about it and reacted to it and talked a little bit about the news for that. And because of the way that this was done, obviously, it got the NWSL Board of Governors involved in that, which before, Lisa, I think it sort of looked like they were just trying to make sure that Baldwin and the franchise sort of took care of it on its own. But with the minority investors sort of showing that they are placing their trust in Michele Kang, and sort of force the issue, right? Kind of force the hand. And the NWSL Board of Governors had to have a meeting with Michele Kang and Steve Baldwin and sort of hear these sort of pitches from each respective party to talk about this process that occurred and why it was fair or why it was unfair, or why it was valid or why it was invalid. And it turns out that after the arguments were made, the NWSL board unanimously approved of the methodology, but were adamant in saying that just because that happened, that still means that the Washington Soccer Properties LLC needs to complete the transaction, and there has to be a vote that takes place before like official recognition of majority ownership for why Michele Kang can actually take place. And I think that's an important angle to maybe sort of settle in a little bit here. Because ultimately, when that release came out, there was some reaction to it where it's like, so the board of governors unanimously, validated, right, the debt holder, the debt to equity conversation, right? But why don't they just make it official? Why don't they? Well, it's because
Right.
the NWSL is also a business. It's also an LLC, and Washington Soccer Properties is also an LLC. And one LLC can't force another LLC to do certain type of business. It's all a lot of legalese that's involved in it. But what this essentially does is it flags and it signals that, hey, if the Washington Soccer Properties LLC eventually goes through the official processes to vote and declare and make Michele Kang the majority owner, that the NWSL Board of Governors will take it that final step and go ahead and approve that and recognize that officially themselves. So that is the next process of this in terms of Washington Spirit. So it's almost like there's a lot of folks out there who are, have been pushing for something like this and wanting to see this come to life, and sort of seeing this recent news. It's almost it's like people were like, oh, is it official? Oh, wait a minute, it's not. Let me take a step back. So it's one of these things where it's like, why Michele Kang is just taking another step forward, right, to possibly obtaining that final piece of becoming majority owner of the Washington Spirit.
Yes, I think that's important to note because it is a lot of, I'm going to say, legal hoops to jump through, and that you and I have been trying to stay updated on, right? Like with the whole debt equity exchange. Like I was Googling every other word because I'm not a business owner of giant corporations, of entire franchises. So to kind of wrap my head around all of this is a little bit difficult because it's like, okay, you approved of Michele Kang and her ability to kind of convince, I'm going to say, minority owners to give her controlling stake of the team. But now it comes back that it's still kind of in the hands of Steve Baldwin and Michele Kang, because the team still has not been sold entirely. And that's kind of like the finish line of this saga, right? That the team gets sold. And to the fans and the players of the Washington Spirit, they want that sale to happen to Michele Kang so that she becomes a majority owner and that she can sit on the board of governors in the NWSL and be at that table and make those decisions. And it really comes full circle back to the CBA discussion, because the CBA negotiations are happening between the Players Association, the NWSL as a league, and then the board of governors, which is the owners that own all of these franchises that come back to this. So it's having the people in the right position of ownership and power to make informed and qualified decisions to do right by the players and do right by the league ultimately. And it comes down to this. So although like these two stories may seem separate between the CBA negotiations and the players potentially going on strike and the Washington Spirit ownership saga that has been happening for months and months and months, they are so intertwined and connected at the bottom of it. And because they both involve the league and the NWSL board overall, it makes things even more tangled, because it's not just like they're having one conversation to focus on. They really have to look at both sides and all sides of each different situation, which then makes it even longer. It's such a process. But good news is that there continue to be developments within the Washington Spirit ownership discussion that is happening. And one of the latest being this conversation between Michele Kang, Steve Baldwin, presenting their own sides of the argument and their sides of this situation to the board. And then the NWSL board ultimately voting on it. But that's not all, Sandra. This story continues.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, somebody cue up the closing credits music. I don't know. It's almost like almost like a horror movie, right? Where you think like the villain is dead, but then it like comes back to life for that one last kind of scare. I'm not trying to minimize it by any means. It's just really like from the outside perspective of this looking in, that's just kind of what it feels like sometimes. And I mean, even with the NWSL Board of Governors sort of unanimous decision on this in terms of just sort of recognizing the process, now that things are back, you know, into Washington soccer properties, now it's like a little bit of some more final attempts to try to like gains one control over things within the franchise. And it was reported by Sportico on January 26th that Steve Baldwin sent an email to the team investors accusing co-owner Michele Kang of all the aforementioned things that he has already accused her of in terms of all the interfighting. The word lies and liar was thrown around there several times. I mean, this has been a months long battle for control over the Washington Spirit, and it's just sort of this email that kind of got released just sort of read like just almost sort of like a final attempt, right, to kind of discredit. At one point, there is literally a moment within this very long email that sort of lays out all of these different grievances against Kang, about no longer wanting to remain silent on things. Baldwin actually writes at one point within this, saying that I've made every attempt to take the high road throughout this ordeal, other than now highlighting a very, very small set of facts of what Bill Lynch, Spirit co-owner, and I dealt with from our, quote, business partner. I have not pestered you. I haven't waged a public campaign. I haven't spoken to media, and I haven't leaked any of the interactions of this group or anything else. Time has come where I can no longer remain silent. It's just it's a lot. It's long and it's lengthy. I think the biggest thing for me that ended up standing out within this is at one point Baldwin refers to former ousted head coach Richie Burke at one point. You know, this is the same head coach that they brought in, who was later investigated for creating a toxic environment, for hurling abusive language at players. And Baldwin refers to this refers to him as someone who could possibly be credible in terms of defaming Michele Kang, that Burke is someone who could allude to the fact that, she promised him additional compensation if he coerced cooperation in ousting Baldwin from the club and to keep their meetings a secret. So just a lot of in this email just sort of coming to light and how Baldwin very clearly views Michele Kang and the process at this point. And it's just really sad. I think that it's sort of, coming to the final act here. That this is sort of what's coming out, and obviously, there's lawyers involved at this point, and legal things involved. And in terms of the leak of this actual email, there's also legal representation for Kang, who are speaking out on her behalf. So it's just one of these things where it's like, we I think all knew that this was going to get quite messy before it actually got cleaned up, unfortunately.
Sandra, you mentioned a number of times the length of this email, 1,500 words written by Steve Baldwin, presumably written by him. Maybe his attorney gave it a glance over before he hit send. But as you mentioned, attorneys involved, because of course, as journalists, The Athletic and Sporting Co. have to reach out to Kang and say, do you have a response to this? And of course, she says no. Her attorney responds for her. She's a smart businesswoman. Basically, Kang with no comment, but the attorney saying, quote, "We are disappointed to learn that Mr. Baldwin continues to repeat these false and inappropriate allegations with the best interests of the team in mind, and the vote by the NWSL Board of Governors last weekend. We are ready to move forward and focus on the next exciting chapter for the Washington Spirit and women's professional soccer." So it's interesting when I read this and when I kind of absorb this information. Baldwin seems to still be trying to throw stones at Kang and accuse her of bad things, whether that's socializing inappropriately with players and becoming too friendly with them, which is one of the points he makes in this letter, that he doesn't think it's appropriate that she has such a friendly relationship with the players, and trying to just accuse her of all of these different things, right? Going into secret coercion deals with then head coach Richie Burke. And at this point, Kang is like, okay, what about the players? What about the team? What about the club? We have to look at the future of this club. We just won the NWSL championship. How do we make this club even better? How do we continue to move forward from this and kind of continue to move on? So it's just so weird, right? Like how all of this is coming out and the continuation of this conversation. Baldwin also saying that Kang doesn't like fund the club and that it is solely Steve Baldwin funding the franchise at this point, but he's minority or majority owner of the club. It's very interesting. And as, excuse me?
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's just a lot of happening. And for him to kind of say, I've taken the high road for so long, and now I'm going to write this email and I'm going to ask the board a lot of questions of their integrity and of Kang's integrity, and try to accuse her of all of these different accusations throughout the season, and even throwing Richie Burke into the mix of all of this, who is not credible at all, right? Like fully under investigation, fully removed from his post, just not a credible source. It's a lot. It's a lot that continues to happen. And unfortunately, the players are involved in this kind of debate because these are their owners of their club.
Yeah, it's oh man, talking about February 1 deadlines, right? This is probably another one that we've got to keep an eye on in terms of things that need to be wrapped up by a certain time, for sure. It's that's lengthy. 1,500 words to sort of make a last ditch attempt, I think, to sort of ensure that you still have control of a team, and quite frankly, it disregards the players. I think even with anyone's best intentions of mind and trying to speak out or feel like they no longer want to be silenced, to use Baldwin's words. I think it disregards the players and their intentions as well. I mean, this is a team and a club with a roster that felt motivated to release a statement of their own, and players put their names on it and their words on it, and said that the person that they no longer trust to run the team is Baldwin, and the person that they trust is Kang. So it's
Mhm.
I think it's something that we'll have to look back on and take a look at all the different pieces, when it's all sort of said, done, and dusted. But we're not quite there yet. So this is just another thing that we'll be keeping an eye on moving forward, along with the ongoing NWSL CBA negotiations.